So the first thing you need to know for this video is you need to be able to find your pro materials. If you don't know where they are, or even if you've installed them, Horror's made this very handy PDF. So here I am on his website. Go to Bryce Documents, Mine, Diverse, and here is the Bryce Content FAQ, and that's very handy if you don't know quite what you've got when you got Bryce, and that will allow you to find, hopefully, the pro materials. So I'm going to hold the control key down and click on a terrain to create a terrain, and hold the shift key down to select the ground plane. I'm just going to group those together so I can scale them together, and I'm going to modify the material for both, and using this little arrow here go into the material library, and then using this little arrow here select pro materials and find LPAC 1 and load in this mountain, lake, high altitude material. Check out of that. Okay, this material is made up of 3 procedural components. The textures, which these are, can either be procedural, in which case they are generated like this in the deep texture editor, and this can be quite tricky to get to grips with at first. There are more videos on my YouTube channel that show you how to do this. Or it can be generated using a picture, which provides a whatever scale you provide, X by Y pixel picture, and alpha if you also supply that, but they're somewhat limited using pictures because they obviously repeat unless you take special care by mixing them up with procedurals to hide the repetition. So in a lot of cases in Bryce you will have better results from using procedural textures, but it's a little bit more difficult to understand them. The way that textures are applied using mapping mode, so this is world space mapping, you can change the modes here. So world space is scaled to the world, so if you have 2 objects and it's world space mapped material, then changing the size of the object won't change the scale of the material on the object, whereas with object space, then if you change the size of the object, then the material stretches and gets bigger. Its scale and orientation and offset are controlled using the transformation tools. So why am I telling you these things? Well, you don't have to go into the deep texture editor at this point to take advantage of the fact you've got procedural materials. All you need to know is how to swap out these components for different components, and then you can look at the results and see whether you like it. So let's have a look at the results of this material. Let's have a quick render. Okay, it's looking a bit dark, so I'm going to load in a sky with a bit more light. So it's just a simple HDRI lighting. Give that a quick render now. Okay, it needs to be a bit bigger, and I happen to know this material has some altitude sensitivity, so some components only appear, like the snow, when it's a bit higher up off the ground. So I've just lifted it up so you can get a look at the texture we've got here. So I should say material, because material is composed of several texture components. Right, so what are these texture components contributing to this material? If I go into Material Lab again, what I can do is swap out these for different things that are obviously going to look quite different, and then I'll know what they're contributing. So if I hold the shift key down and click on this name, I can go in the texture library and I'll load in this check blue, which is one of the basic components, and that will allow me through a quick render to see what is being contributed by that texture component. So supposing I want that texture component because I like the look of it, it's obviously that stony horizontal rocky appearance texture, but in a different material altogether. So I'll do Ctrl Z so it restores the material to where it was before I swapped the check blue in, and then I'll go into the Material Lab and I'm going to save this in the library. So hold the shift key down, click on the name, and then I can add a category of my own to the library by clicking on this plus here. So I'll just add a category, so I'll call this My Cat for Textures, whatever name you want. And then you can add this like so. Just click the add button, you can give it whatever name you want. You can add a description. This is stone. So there you go, and that's added to your own category there, which you can then navigate to. So then I'll change the material. It sometimes gets a bit lost after you've switched between the libraries for some reason. I think because I've got the library so large, so you might have to navigate back to where you were and then pick something else out. So let's see, Frozen Shore Mountains. Let's have a look what that one looks like. So that's quite a snowy one, and I'm going to find out what bit's providing what. So we'll swap this one out here for something else. So we'll just find our check blue again. It's an obvious one. So I'll give that a quick render now. Okay, you can see the checks are a bit larger on this one, and then I go into the materials here and holding the shift key down, click on the name, navigate to wherever my category for textures was, select that texture, load it in, check out, and now I've swapped that component for a different component. So I've manufactured a new material from the component that I saved, and if I want to now add that to the library for the materials, I can do that as well. So I can add that. It's got lost again. I've got my own category for this, but you can add one yourself. So I could say like my new material cat. Okay, and then I can add that as a new material. So I've taken existing materials, there we go, and then generated my own material category in there, and a new material from the texture components that I'd picked out from the ones that were already existing in this library. If you want to create more of these selections, you need to navigate into where Bryce is. So where I've got a shortcut that takes me to where Bryce is, and you go into the presets and materials, and then you can create a new folder that you can just copy one of these in, and then you can create your own little folders. So you've got an ever extending selection. You just need to be aware that there's a limitation on the size of these files. So this is just the file structure, and these are the mat files. You don't want to let these mat files get any bigger than 2 gigabytes, because at that point it becomes corrupt. So that's the reason to create more categories and more folders, so you don't accidentally corrupt your selection of materials, because that's a bit irritating. Likewise, you've got the textures here, and so you can see they've got a lot of textures. These take up a lot less space because they're built procedurally. If it's image textures, they can grow quite big, but you know, that's a different problem altogether. So anyway, I'm digressing slightly here. It always gets more complicated when you start getting into these things. What you need to do then is, if you want to remix, you can save your materials here, and you can save your textures by holding the shift key down and clicking on the name. So suppose we wanted to save this texture, then you navigate to where your category is. It's changed its position again. Add that one in. So that's a new one there. You don't have to add a description. That's optional. Then go back to your material library. Just move this slider to make things reappear. We'll go back to where we were, Mountain Lake High Altitude, and then we can swap this out for the one we just saved. So go back to my category, block backwards and forwards, pick that one out there, and then that will give rise to yet another different looking material. So I've got like 2 different brightnesses of snow on this because it was a snowy one. So there you go. Really lots to experiment with there. Easy to swap things out, fairly easy to scale them so they look different. So here, if you lower this value here, then you scale down the material, and you can see that the rocks are spreading out a bit. So if you've got other things in your scene, then you might feel that you need to match the scales of the materials appropriately, because obviously the broader you spread this out, then the smaller this mountain's going to look. But if you're going to do mountains, lower your camera position and look up, and you might get more of an impression of scale. So it flattens the horizon and puts you on the ground. And likewise, you can also increase an impression of scale. So I was talking about terrains here. I'll just give this a quick go. Enlarging your mountain like so. Well, you can see the snow's moved up there, so we've got a lot more snow, and incorporating it into the sky haze if you can. So go into Skylab here, and you can increase the haze setting, and then that will tend to push things back a bit. It's a bit of an extreme haze setting I've gone for there, but so remix your materials and have an experiment with the scale, because it's getting appropriate scales and getting things to interact intelligently with the sky gives you your impression of how things are going to look size-wise. So like I say, if you're presented with this blank because you've been in the material lab, and I'm not sure whether it affects everybody or just me because I've created so many textures and materials, then just move this slider and things will reappear. And you know, just try stuff out from the lab and see how it looks. So just try different stuff out and see if you like the look of it. Okay then, I think I've gone on long enough about this. Hope you found that useful, and that you'll experiment with mixing your own materials from the texture components that you can borrow from other materials, just saving you the trauma of looking in the deep texture editor until you're ready to do so. Cheers now.